Another soulmate, he thought in awe, and the two were left there, staring at each other. Her eyes were glistening, darting across all the features of his face as a light, pink tint came across her slightly tanned cheeks. So why you're okay? She blinked a few moments as if she were coming from a dream and forgot the situation she was actually in. Oh yeah, I'm fine, she insisted, looking at his hand and blushing just a tad harder as she took it, and let Izuku help her up. He feels really strong, he must train a whole lot too, his hands are really coarse, she thought, feeling her cheeks burning up slightly. Thanks, man. Oh no problem, it's the least I could do, really. He insisted. Her hand feels really cool, somehow. Are you in the hero course too? She asked, frankly surprised by her own underlying tone of hopefulness. I'm in class 1A. He smiled back and nodded. Really? That's awesome, because so am I, but how could you tell? It's 'cause you're super buff, man, she laughed, making him blush a little harder and begin to stammer slightly in response. Granted, he was slowly getting used to being called handsome or cute by Ochako and Katsumi, but positive comments about his body were still uncharted territory for him. Seriously, you look really cool in that uniform. Izuku awkwardly coughed into his fist, still blushing profusely. Thanks, you look really cool in yours too, she giggled a little and showed up an array of super sharp, shark-like teeth. A red-haired carnivore kinda scary, but really really cool, he internally squealed. I was trying to find classroom 1A. Do you want to walk down together, since we'll be classmates from now on? She nodded eagerly with the same kind, sharkish smile. Heck yeah, but, do you want to keep holding hands while we do, or? He blinked, then looked down and noticed that they were, indeed, still holding hands. Oh, I'm sorry, he fretted, quickly letting go and putting his hands to his side. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable or anything. Her back seemed to stiffen a little bit while her face reddened even further and her eyes widened slightly. She just stood there, staring for a moment before breaking out into a fit of laughter, throwing her head back as she came to his side, then slapped his back. "Aw man, that's super manly, man," she said, hooking her arm around his shoulder and tugging him in. Manly? Like, chivalrous? He thought, before laughing as well and straightening up slightly, albeit a bit awkwardly. Thank you. I'm Izuku Midoriya, by the way, it's nice to meet you. I'm Eiko Kurashima, she announced proudly as they began to walk. It's good to meet you too, bro. Izuku chuckled, then brought up his phone again, giving Ochako and Katsumi the directions. Finally, they both came before the front door, which was absolutely massive, about 3 times as wide as Izuku, and going up to the several-meter-tall ceiling. Eiko whistled at the sight of it. Whoa. I guess it's for people with mutant quirks and stuff like that. Izuku nodded. Most likely really makes you feel less small, huh? Eiko just chuckled again, patting his back. Sure, but that's no way to talk. Let's take on UA head first, just like real, manly heroes, she cheered, tugging him along as she took another step forward, but was shocked to feel that he didn't even budge. She was stunned for a moment, before turning back to Izuku, who only smiled apologetically. You can go ahead, Kurashima. I'm going to wait here for a moment for those girls that you saw me with when we came in. He explained, patting her back. But I agree, let's take everything UA can throw at us, like real heroes, and be the manly heroes of our dreams. There was a clear presence of nervousness on his face, and he was clearly aware of it too. Yet, he smiled and spoke bravely, and felt like he was talking about an ideal version of himself, the kind of hero he'd become in UA. In a way, Izuku reminded Eiko of herself. How she trained her body and her quirk and dyed her hair with her transformation from middle school to here, all on the path to being a true, chivalrous hero. She sighed quietly, then patted his shoulder while smiling. Right on, man. She pulled away, then grabbed the handle of the door, but turned back to him before she opened it. You're a pretty cool dude, Midoriya. I'm happy we're in the same class. Finally, they smiled at each other one more time, before she entered. Izuku sighed deeply, feeling a familiar heat in his chest as he turned around and put his back against the wall beside the sign. Kirishima was super nice. She seemed a little like, who am I thinking of? He was really chivalrous, and had spiky red hair like hers then. His eyes widened slightly in realization. Of course Crimson Riot, I'd bet she's a big fan of his. That's so cool, a worthy idol for a brave, kind girl like her. The thought came to him suddenly, and he couldn't help but blush a little bit. Then, he stayed against the wall for a few more moments as he waited until his brow suddenly furrowed. Wait, did I say manly? Deku Izuku's head turned to the side as Ochako and Katsumi came skidding to a halt around the corridor, then came up right beside him. Thanks for waiting, Ochako greeted, looking over herself and quickly straightening out her skirt and jacket as Katsumi smirked at the door, staring at it intensely. No problem at all, he said, stepping forward to grab the handle. Are you two ready? Seriously? Hell yeah, as I'll ever be, they answered in unison, with Katsumi smirking a little wider and stepping forward while Ochako looked pumped up, making two fists. Izuku smiled and opened the door while looking inside, quickly spotting a head of spiky red hair and smiling a little wider, then turned around again to Ochako and Katsumi. After you? Suddenly, Izuku faltered as he looked down and in between the gaps of Ochako's and Katsumi's shoulders at what looked like a giant yellow caterpillar with the face of a human wearing goggles, which only really added to the bug-like appearance. He stared, completely frozen in shock as Ochako and Katsumi turned to look, equally as shocked as the caterpillar person looked up to them, or at least he assumed so, as her head tilted upward, but the goggles made it impossible to read her expression. Then she brought a pouch of banana-flavored jelly to their lips. What do you think you're doing, just standing around like that? Get to your seats. She ordered in a bored tone, before starting to drink from her pouch. Within moments, Izuku, Katsumi, and Ochako sped into their seats as the rest of the class's chatter finally died down. Meanwhile, the caterpillar woman, who everyone assumed was their teacher, slithered from her sleeping bag and stuffed it under the podium, then tossed her pouch into the garbage bin. Besides her yellow goggles, her jumpsuit was black and slightly baggy, with gray compartments on her belt, a white scarf around her neck, and long, slightly disheveled black hair that went down to her shoulders. Her expression was obscured by her goggles, but he shivered as he sensed her scanning the room, and over himself. It was honestly a little terrifying, both by disguising her face with her drapes of hair and goggles that were pitch black between the yellow bars, almost resembling a security camera waiting to catch them slipping up. Finally, she stood up straighter with a small huff. It took you all 8 seconds to settle down. For a hero, time is of the utmost importance, and if any of you plan on staying in my class, you'll do well to remember that. She said in the same tired, straightforward voice, but in a louder and more authoritative tone now that she was addressing the entire class. It was a really unnerving feeling that made Izuku gulp silently. 10 seconds into his first class and the threat of expulsion was already hanging over him. My name is Shoka Aizawa, I'll be your homeroom teacher from now on, so all of you will refer to me as Ms. Aizawa or Sensei. And our first order of business is an apprehension test. Izuku could tell that everyone, including himself, was caught off guard by that. However, sitting behind Katsumi, he could tell that the surprise turned into excitement for the challenge ahead. Then, on the other side of the room, Ochako raised her hand, and Ms. Aizawa's head turned slightly towards her. Yes? Ma'am, I heard we were supposed to go to the auditorium for initiation. Aizawa just sighed and slammed her hands against the podium seriously. As I've just said, time is of the utmost importance. Anyone who's serious about being a hero wouldn't leisurely waste their time with something as pointless as initiation. Then, a tall, bespectacled, blue-haired girl who sat right in front of Ochako shot her hand straight into the air and waited until Aizawa acknowledged her. Not to undermine your authority, Sensei, but wouldn't you get in trouble for not bringing us to initiation? Aizawa's head jerked slightly in her direction and Izuku assumed she was glaring at the girl who asked the question. We teachers have been given a great deal of freedom and relatively few limits. So long as I prove my students to be up to standard, I can do as I please. Therefore, I decided we're going to have an apprehension test. She's really intense, Izuku thought to himself, before his brow suddenly furrowed in thought. Wait, we all passed the exam, so why have an apprehension test this early? And you may be thinking to yourselves that since you passed the entrance exam, why would I give you a test this early? Izuku flinched and sat up straighter. It's so I can properly and carefully examine each and every one of you for myself. And if necessary, weed out anyone I can tell that has no potential at all. Her words rang out through the entirely silent, still, and super tense room. Plus, with how her goggles blocked her eyes, Izuku's sinking feeling of doubt and anxiety made him feel like she could have been staring straight at him, as if to say, I know you don't belong here, boy. Then, Aizawa actually spoke up again now, get your gym uniforms on and meet me in the P. grounds, outside of Gym Gamma. Anyone not present within 25 minutes will be expelled on the spot. She ordered, walking to the door before turning around to look at the clock. Starting now. Everyone quickly got from their seats in a rush that didn't even allow him to look around the classroom. Come on, nerd, you're not getting expelled on our first damn day, pick up the pace, round face, she yelled towards Ochako, speeding out of the room while holding tight to Izuku's hand. See you out there, Ochako, he yelled urgently, leaning back as far as he could to see out of the door. But before he was fully pulled out, his eyes also darted to Kurashima, who looked odd. It was a hard emotion for him to place, but there was worry and anxiousness, with her hand out towards them as if she wanted to yell at either of them to wait up. Unfortunately, the only thing he could get out for her was a small, apologetic smile before Katsumi dragged him through the corridor again. He also had to stop her from dragging him into the girls' changing room but promised to be quick about it. Well, he kept his word and changed as quickly as possible, but when he left, he saw Kurashima leaving, fully dressed as well, but no Katsumi or Ochako. Oh, hey man, this is pretty exciting, isn't it? He looked at the girl's door, before wincing as he began to walk towards the P. grounds. Katsumi would surely be mad, but he was also sure she'd understand. Why yeah, although I am really nervous, you don't think Ms. Aizawa will really expel us, do you? He asked as Kurashima turned as well, walking alongside him. I'd hope not, but I guess she does have a point, you know? Only people who are serious about being heroes should be here, kinda like you, Midoriya, punctuating her sentence with a laugh and a small jab to his arm. Haha, thanks. He looked down at his arm, then hers, then raised his fist to tap her shoulder gently. Izuku could definitely see how a girl like this would have been his soulmate. She was jovial, kind, strong, heroic, and fitting to her cute tomboy personality, and contact was clearly her way of showing comfort and camaraderie. However, in response to being tapped back, she stiffened up, grabbing her shoulder where he tapped it, and her face turned bright and violently red. She noticed it too and turned to face the ground instead of him. And no problem. After a few steps, she noticed he had stopped moving, and quirked an eyebrow as she turned back to him, who was completely frozen. What the hell did I just do? Of course I shouldn't just touch a girl like that, what's the matter with me? He mentally screamed, before suddenly throwing himself forehead first into the ground hard enough to crack the floor as he went into Dejiza. Huh? Midoriya, what are you doing? I'm so sorry for that. I should know better than to just touch someone without their permission, especially not to someone who has been as nice to me as you have, he apologized, wedging his forehead into the crack to bow even lower somehow. Eiko stood there for a few moments longer in stunned silence, before breaking the silence with a small giggle. A giggle that grew steadily into full-blown, hearty laughter. Midoriya, you're such a man, aren't you? Izuku just stayed down. You can get up, I'm not mad, she said, although Izuku still stayed down. After waiting for a few moments, Eiko just sighed, then squatted down next to him. You want the truth? I'm not really used to guys playing along with me, and a lot of them are jerks when they do. But you? You just try your hardest to get along with me. You're a real man. So you can get up, okay? Izuku lifted his head, and she was taken aback to see his forehead cut and his eyes woozy. That's awesome, Kirishima Buet, could you help me to the grounds? My head's spinnin'. And so, Kirishima arrived at the PE grounds with Izuku over her shoulder a minute later, and he had a moment to focus his vision and wipe the blood from his forehead before Katsumi and Ochako arrived as well. Aizawa was looking down at her phone until the alarm went off, and she looked up to see everyone standing at attention. Good. She announced simply, as I said before, we're going to be having an apprehension test, so that I may gauge your abilities for myself. What's more, there's something I should tell you all before we begin. Izuku found himself with a ping of spitefulness in his chest as she paused dramatically, and he could have sworn he saw her smirk for half a second as she apparently scanned over their faces. Whichever one of you scores the lowest will be deemed unworthy. Therefore, that person shall be expelled. There was immediate and widespread shock and outrage, and Izuku saw Kirishima clenching her fist as she shouted, "What? That's awful. On the first day? But that's not fair." Oh, so you think that that's unfair? She snapped, instantly silencing her class. Even though her lips didn't form a scowl, they could still feel the power of her glowering through her goggles. Do you think natural disasters are fair? Do you think that villains care about fairness and playing nice? If any of you have a problem with how I run things, you can pack your things and leave, and make the best thing you managed to accomplish on this campus is that you spared me the trouble of expelling you. The class had to swallow their protests and accept their positions, suddenly tensing up again as Aizawa waited for a few moments, before reaching behind her back and taking out a baseball. No objections? Good. She tilted her head in Katsumi's direction. Bakugo, step forward. Katsumi stepped forward by a few paces. Knowing that she got first place in the entrance exam, Izuku figured that Aizawa wanted to test her first. Yeah? What was your ball toss distance from middle school? She asked simply, tossing the ball up a short distance before catching it again, and Katsumi smirked a little. About 30 meters. How far do you think you could throw it using your quirk? She asked, and Katsumi's eyes went wide for a few moments. That's right, for this test, you're all going to be using your quirks to help yourselves as best as possible. It's only logical to use all the tools you have available and not hold back. She tossed the ball at Katsumi, who caught it effortlessly. So have at it. Katsumi smirked and walked up to the pitch as Aizawa went to the side, pulling out a device that looked like a speedometer. Prepare yourself, then throw when ready. Aizawa instructed. Katsumi rolled her shoulders and put one foot in front of the other. Then, she looked straight at Izuku and said, "This one's for you," making his face go completely red as he felt his classmates stare at him. She reeled back, then screamed die as she threw it, letting off an explosion the instant it left her grip, sending it flying at Mach speed, leaving behind a white trail like a rocket ship and leaving the class in total awe. Wait, die? Izuku thought, before being snapped out of his thoughts by Aizawa's device beeping, and she peered down to read it. 705.2 meters. Not bad. Katsumi smirked as she walked back, winking at Izuku as she sauntered back into place, and from there Izuku could hear her saying, "Beat that to Ochako," and Ochako replying, "Fine." Izuku couldn't help but wince, wondering how he could get them to get along a little better. But he couldn't help but blush again as he idly thought about how well they were getting along when they were having a three-way kissing session. After Katsumi's performance, everyone was pumped up and began to use their quirks in cool, innovative ways that made him wish he had his notebooks with him. such as the girl who created a cannon out of her stomach, which Izuku would spend the day trying to figure out how that worked, or the blue-haired girl kicking the ball with her engine-powered legs, and another who had a raven's head, whose shadow came to life to spike the ball further away after she threw it, and Izuku also got to see Kirishima's quirk. Her body could harden like stone, which apparently increased her strength, given how she used it to throw the ball. Apparently, it also made her feel like flexing a little, specifically while blushing slightly and smiling at him. And then came Ochako's turn, who threw her ball, which began to float away and away, further out of sight until it was no more. Finally, Aizawa's machine beeped, and she nonchalantly announced Ochako's score: infinity. Well done. She smiled even wider than Katsumi did, and said, told you so. Proudly and basking in her self-satisfaction, Katsumi's rage, and Izuku's enthusiastic praise. Finally, Izuku's turn came. He nervously and stiffly walked to the pitch while Katsumi, Ochako, and Kirishima cheered behind him. Right, he reminded himself as he took the ball. I can't let them down for my dream, for Mom, and so we can all go to school and be heroes together. He squeezed the ball intensely, with a focused and steely expression, despite how nervous he felt in his gut. So I can be a hero and to have a perfect high school romance, he concentrated, gathering one for all in his arm while reeling it back. Then, his sleeve from his bicep to his wrist burst open, showing his glowing skin and green traces of electricity bounding on his skin. The rest of the class was awed, although Katsumi was stuck completely slack-jawed and staring as Ochako hooped. And on the other hand, Kirishima had her hands cusping the bottom half of her face, her breathing slightly labored as her eyes twinkled with delight. That's so freaking manly. Finally, he took a step forward and roared as he threw it, only for it to cut off at the very last moment, and it landed a measly distance away. He stared at it blankly, slowly standing up straighter as he looked down at his arm, curling and uncurling his fingers. But my quirk, what just happened? I erased it. Aizawa said, making Izuku look over to her and suddenly gasp. Her hair was levitating as if she were underwater, and the faintest red glow came from under her goggles. Wait a second, Izuku thought, squinting for a moment before his eyes widened in shock. That scarf, those goggles, her quirk, she can only be Yuri Eraserhead? That's awesome. Aizawa looked amused and even impressed for a moment before it was washed off the visible bottom of her face. What did you think you were doing? She demanded, walking right up to him. I saw how much recoil your quirk has, Midoriya. If you threw that ball, were you just planning on toughing the rest of the day out with a useless arm, or were you planning on Recovery Girl coming out to heal you again? Izuku couldn't help but flinch. She was harsh, but she had a point, and he could only just stand there and take it. If you can't help but break your arms and legs when you step on the field, you're just a liability. And if that's what you plan on being, get out, now. Izuku gulped and stood up as straight as possible as she walked to grab the ball, then chucked it into his hand. Try again, but do it seriously this time. Izuku clenched the ball hard and stared down at it, before sighing deeply. Got it. Meanwhile, Ochako and Katsumi found themselves united as they glared at Aizawa. Ochako's fists were clenched, and Katsumi's fingers twitched in the way it did when she was itching to blow something up, and her teeth gritting together, which was an indicator that her patience was reaching a dangerous low. Kirishima, on the other hand, felt more conflicted internally. Her fist was clenched, and her other was brought to her chest, against her uneasy heart. What's going on with me? I mean, it's total bullshit how she's talking to him, but I shouldn't be this upset about it, right? But I just want him to make her eat her words, damn it, go Izuku. Back at the pitch, Izuku got back into position and reeled his arm back again. This time, when he threw it, he looked like he wasn't using his quirk at all until the very last moment, where there was a flash of light and what looked and felt to be a sonic boom coming from his arm, and the ball was sent flying through the air at Mach speed. But after the throw, he just stood slumped over slightly, panting until Aizawa announced his score. 705.3 meters. Ms. Izawa, he called, turning to her and bringing himself up again, standing up straight and showing his fist he used to throw the ball and the grotesque, purple-tinted broken finger. He looked like he was trying his very hardest not to cry, and he was sweating profusely. It hurts, but I can still keep going. That means I'm not a liability after I use my quirk, see? It was hard to read her expression, but even with her slightly masked appearance, she was more than impressed and smiled wide in an odd, almost triangular way, as if she didn't actually know how to smile, but was still trying. Well, that's a pleasant surprise, all right, go back to the group. We're moving on with the test. He couldn't help but laugh as relief rolled over him, and he quickly walked back with a bit of a limp. Deku Katsumi roared, running at him with Ochako following suit, and for a split second Izuku was wondering if that was how his life was going to end and how it wasn't a bad way to go either, until she was at his side, carefully holding his arm at his elbow, then at his wrist. Are you okay? What is the matter with your quirk? Ochako came to his other side and hugged him with his head toward her chest, despite his stammering and red-faced protests, then began to move left and right while cooing. Oh Deku, are you okay? Is there anything I can do? She fretted, while Izuku tried to escape. Hey, it feels really nice to be pampered a little, but why here of all places? Then, they were suddenly interrupted as Izawa cleared her throat behind them, and Katsumi snapped towards her. If you three are done doing whatever that was, we're going to continue with the exam. Besides, it's not logical to try attending to someone without proper medical supplies. She said, reaching into one of her pockets and taking out bandages. So both of you get back in the group, and I'll wrap his finger. Katsumi and Ochako scowled, then squeezed Izuku one last time before going back, leaving Izawa and Izuku behind. Meanwhile, Kurashima was left confused just like the rest of the class. However, she was more focused on whether or not Izuku was dating one of them, or maybe they were all just super good friends. Finally, Izuku came back, rubbing his arm with the broken finger. Sorry for keeping everyone up. He apologized shyly, looking down at his feet. Don't worry about it, man, Eiko said, about to slap his back, but deciding against it at the last moment. Your quirk is super cool, by the way. Still, it's awful what it does to ya. Izuku gave a soft laugh and smiled a little as Izawa led the class to the next activity. Yeah, I'm something of a late bloomer, so I can't really control it that well, but I'll keep getting better. I've got to, he said, clenching his fist with a renewed intensity. That's so manly, Eiko cheered quietly, clenching her own fist with a matching, pumped-up intensity. I'll be rooting for you, man, and if we both survive this, we can train all the time, so I can help you. Izuku perked up and snapped out of his intense moment as he turned to her, blushing slightly as he smiled widely. Yeah, I'd love that, Kurashima, let's do this. He seemed to smile and shine brighter than the sun. She gasped, feeling her heart hammering against her chest as her face became as red as her hair. Then, she giggled softly and nodded. That's what's up. As hard as he tried, however, Izuku found himself lacking behind in every other event. Everyone could use their quirk to get at least one absurdly high score in one activity or another, and despite Kurashima's, Katsumi's, and Ochako's praise and cheering, he had a horrible sinking feeling in his guts. Finally, they were in the group again, standing around as Izawa tallied up everyone's points, then aimed her machine in front of them and pressed a button, creating a hologram of the leaderboard. In first and second place were Yaoyorozu, the girl who made a cannon from nothing, and a wide assortment of other tools as well, and Todoroki, a girl with her hair split right down the middle, red and white, who used ice powers. And in third place came Katsumi, who roared with frustration. Bullshit. Izuku, meanwhile, was looking down the list, growing ever more nervous as he looked down the list. By the time he reached 10th place, he felt his chest too tight and too cold to breathe properly. 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 18th, 19th. He shuddered, feeling his shoulders trembling as he looked in the 20th and last place Izuku Midoriya. He gasped, feeling his knees buckling under him as he stared at his name, with 20th place right next to it. How? He muttered to himself, feeling all warmth leaving his body and feeling dread replacing it. Within a few moments, he saw Ochako gasping and covering her mouth with her hand, then turning towards him with her eyes wide and full of worry. Soon after, Katsumi was staring in the same place he was, her shoulders slumped helplessly. All right, that's enough of that," Aizawa ordered, and the chatter died out. "Now, about what I said, where whoever was in last place was to be expelled." No. Off Katsumi stomped in front of Izuku and stood between him and Aizawa. "Kei-chan, please don't. Stop being so damn nice, Deku," she barked, looking over her shoulder before turning back to Aizawa. "All you've done is with Deku all day, calling him a liability, belittling him, and now you're going to kick him out? Touch him and we'll kill you, you old hag." Ignoring the shocked and affronted gasps, Aizawa tilted her head and asked, "We?" Katsumi turned to Ochako, who suddenly blurted out, "It'll look like an accident." Aizawa rounded on her, making her falter and stand down before she rushed to Izuku's side and grabbed his arm defiantly. "Yeah, so if you think you're going to," and faster than she could react, Aizawa's scarf was wrapped tight around her mouth and hands, leaving her struggling and growling like a wolf. "Kachan. Damn, you're loud. If you would have let me finish, you would have heard me say that it was all a ruse." At that, Katsumi suddenly stopped struggling, and Izuku froze while trying to untangle her. "That's right," she announced with her oddly triangular, shit-eating grin. "It was all a logical ruse, in order to get you all to try your hardest." A wave of relief washed over them all, then Yaoyorozu looked around, confused. "Well, yes, that was obvious. I thought everyone had known." So Kurashima spoke up, trying to hide her desperate hopefulness. "He's not being expelled." "Not today." "Well, there's still time left in the day, so maybe." "So rather not in this instance, no," she answered, pulling her scarf back towards her and leaving Katsumi down, and Izuku helped her stand up. Aizawa opened her mouth to speak again, but then Izuku turned to her, and glared. Not in the way that Bakugo did to everyone around her, or the cutesy one Uraraka gave. Oh no, it was an icy, rageful glare that made even her falter. It was a look that didn't belong on a kind, boyish face like his. "Glad I'm wearing my goggles," she thought to herself. "If he saw that, he caught me off guard or scared me. I'm going on a limb here and saying the two of you are close," she said, nodding towards Izuku and Katsumi. "Get her to behave herself before she gets into big trouble," she warned, before turning and walking off, then waved dismissively. "Class is dismissed for the day. Your first day as real heroes in training begins tomorrow." Izuku sighed deeply, then leaned down to swipe dirt off of Katsumi's knee. "Are you okay, Kachan?" he asked, his voice a mix of worry and annoyance. Katsumi blushed slightly and nodded. "I'm all good. Bitch cheated and caught me off guard, that's all," she said coolly, moving some stray hair behind her ear. "Do you think that if I beat her up, I'll get my hero license early?" Ochako came to her other side and tilted her head curiously. "Like how if you beat up a karate grandmaster, they give you a black belt?" "That's not at all how that works." A tall blonde boy piped up behind her, and Izuku couldn't help but notice a tail lazily swishing behind him, with a tuft of equally blonde hair at the end. Then, Izuku felt someone tap his shoulder, and he turned to see Kurashima, who was smiling, although a little more shyly than she had been today. "Oh, hey Kurashima, looks like we did survive, huh?" he said with a small laugh. Meanwhile, Katsumi and the boy with the tail debated if one who could beat up a karate grandmaster should receive a black belt in the background, with the others acting as commentators and referees. Eiko nodded happily. And I just wanted you to know I was serious about helping you train. We can go right after class if you want. That was way too close of a call. He sighed from exhaustion. Yeah, I know. I thought I was a goner for sure anyways. I have some stuff to do right after class, so we should exchange numbers first. She seemed taken aback for a moment as her cheeks turned pink, then she agreed, and they told each other their numbers. Afterward, Izuku turned around to wrangle Katsumi with Ochako's help, and Kurashima walked away to get dressed again, but she looked back to watch him for a few moments, before giggling and turning away. When she got her phone, she added Izuku as quickly as possible to confirm it was the right one, and he texted back within a few minutes, "Hi Kurashima." She had never found herself being so happy to receive a text before, even though he was literally just on the other side of a wall. I'm probably gonna get dressed right when I get home. Unless you've got something going on? Behind her, Ochako began to stall in the middle of getting dressed to look at Katsumi's back. She lingered there for a few moments longer, but snapped out of it when Katsumi pulled her shirt over herself and began to button them up. Ochako gulped, before quickly turning back around, blushing to herself as she looked down and raised a leg, pulling up her leggings. Are you still getting dressed? Move it, round-faced Katsumi barked with her bag and jacket over her shoulder in one hand. Then, she reeled back her free hand and slapped the closet part of Ochako without thought on her butt, which was slightly jutted out while Ochako was bent forward and getting dressed. Ochako's back straightened as she yelped, her face bright red as she turned around, rubbing her backside. "Kei Katsumi, what was that for?" Katsumi opened her mouth to shout again, before she fully realized what she had done, and she was frozen still, her jaw open and twitching slightly. Just like Ochako, she was bright red and embarrassed. I was trying to make why you hurry up, round face. I didn't like it, or anything. Got it? Kirishima paused, smirking and quirking an eyebrow while looking over her shoulder, before shaking her head. They make a cute couple, she thought before looking back down at her phone. That'd be really nice, but I'm going to be walking Kaken home, and Ochako down to the station. She smiled and looked over her shoulder again to the squabbling girls, who looked even more embarrassed than when they started, seemingly because Bakugo, or Kaken, seemed content on doubling down over and over again instead of leaving it be, and Uraraka was accusing her of being a brute and a total son. That's really manly of you, man. You're tight with Bakugo, right? What's she like? I saw her in the entrance exam today and she seems like a total badass. She sent it, but added in her head, but she's pretty angry though. I know, right? Barely a few moments after Eiko sent her last text, Izuku's voice came from the other side of the wall where the boys' changing room was, and Ochako and Katsumi finally stopped arguing. Deku? They both asked in impressed unison. Meanwhile, the girl changing next to Eiko, Kyoka Jairu, was rubbing her ear. How can anyone be that loud? She growled, both annoyed and impressed. A minute or so later, Eiko walked back out the door and smiled when she saw Izuku. Hey, Midoriya. Izuku waved to her, blushing slightly. He was against the opposite wall, waiting to take Ochako and Katsumi home. Hi, Kirishima. So, you want to learn a little more about Kaken? He asked eagerly, bouncing slightly on his heels. She giggled, then walked up to him and joined his side. Sure, so long as we have the time. Although, just as a heads up, they were squabbling a little bit in there, so they might be a minute. Izuku's smile drooped a little, then he sighed deeply. She felt a pang of sympathy for him. Obviously, he just wanted his friends to get along, but judging by how they were arguing and what they were even arguing about, she wouldn't have been worried if she were him. They were they? I hope at least they weren't bothering anyone too much. She chuckled nervously, then just shook her head. No. No one seemed to mind that much. In fact, it was actually kind of funny since Bakugo was trying to get Uraraka to get dressed quicker, but made her stop to argue, while Bakuyo herself was already dressed and ready to leave. Izuku smirked, then chuckled under his breath. Yeah, that sounds like Kaken. She says she doesn't like a lot of things and hates a lot more things, but I think she just doesn't want everyone to know how lovey-dovey she is, he sighed dreamily, before snapping back to reality. Oh, don't tell her I told you that, please. Eiko giggled again, then shut her lips and made a zipping motion, and winked. He blushed deeply and nodded. Thanks, Kirishima. She smiled and nodded back, before laying back against the wall. Then, she gulped and took a deep breath. You can call me Eiko, Midoriya. HM? He perked up. Oh, are you sure? She knew that she was blushing just as much as she was, but she ignored her embarrassment and nodded again. Why yes, she answered, before suddenly and stiffly raising her fist so fast that he thought that she was going to punch him. We're like brothers, and gym buddies, right? Izuku paused for a moment, before smiling fondly and nodding back. Yeah. And fist bumped her. And it's only fair if you call me Izuku, too. Just as they pulled away, Katsumi kicked open the door with Ochako at her side. However, both of them had bright pink cheeks, looked in exactly opposite directions from each other, and were also completely silent, even as they took Izuku's hands and began to walk off. Oh, by Kirishima, I'll talk to you later, and at that, both Ochako and Katsumi held him tighter. She smiled fondly and waved to him until he turned the corner and left. Then, she hiked up her bag and decided it was time to leave. After leaving, she found herself alone with her thoughts as she walked home, reflecting on everything. Like Izuku, Bakugo, her classmates, her scary homeroom teacher, Izuku, the apprehension test, what could be coming up in the school year, Izuku, her training, wanting to be a hero, and Izuku. It created a swirling, confusing well inside her which was laced with confusion and anxiety. She wanted to push it down, but it only welled up again, and she suddenly punched herself in the dome to help keep them down while also startling everyone around her as she walked past. Less than an hour later, she finally arrived home, dropping her bag beside her bed before jumping onto it, landing on her stomach as she pulled out her phone again. Seriously though, I really dig the chivalry. She read the message over really quickly, wondering if it were too flirty, or not flirty enough. So, she just screwed her eyes tight and sent it, waiting until she felt her phone vibrate in her hands to open them again. Thank you. I think you're really cool too, Kirishima, super manly. Eiko tossed over in bed and rolled onto her back, feeling her cheeks heating up even more as she read it over and over again. He thinks I'm cool, he thinks I'm manly. She never thought she would think or say the word manly in a negative context, but there was a first time for everything. He thought she was manly. Cool, sure, but not like a girl. And if he didn't see her as a girl, then she wouldn't have any chance. Wait, any chance for what? She thought, her brows suddenly furrowing. Why would I care whether or not he sees me as a? Then, she let out a small gasp as realization struck her. Oh. Izuku was outside of the public gym about an hour after he first got home, texted Katsumi and Ochako he was going to train, and sent a dozen heart emojis each. He decided to wear a simple pair of shorts and a blue jacket. He looked down at his phone, looking over the last few messages, saying that he was ready, and Eiko asking him where and when to meet up. Hey, Izuku. Izuku looked up while moving to put his phone away, but was so shell-shocked by the sight of Kirishima that he went entirely rigid, dropping his phone to the ground without even noticing. Eiko was in a black pair of sweatpants with gray lines along her legs and red highlights, along with a matching black sports bra that also had red highlights. It was also clear that she was a little unused to wearing it, given how much she was blushing. Izuku, however, was still gaping and malfunctioning as she walked up to him, then went down to pick up his phone before offering it to him. Are you okay? I don't look that bad in this, do I? What? No, oh of course you don't, sorry, he apologized, pocketing his phone. I just didn't really know what to say, you just look that great. Eiko huffed joyfully and felt herself clamming up from the compliment, and her hands awkwardly met behind her back and squeezed each other tight. Thanks, I think why you look good too, it's really manly? Izuku helped, then laughed as she nodded. Awesome. Alright, do you want to head in? I was thinking about what you said, and I really want to get way stronger so we can take whatever UA throws at us head on, right? She perked up at that, feeling her insides lighting up with delight. Then, she brought both hands from her back and put up fists, with a sudden intense and sharp-toothed smile. Yeah, let's do it. Ah, she's so cute when she's fired up, Izuku thought, before getting the door for Eiko, then walking inside behind her. A couple of minutes later, as per her request, Eiko and Izuku were side by side on mats, doing the same stretches half kneeling, with one foot up, their backs arching, and their opposite hand reaching backward. Izuku was breathing deeply, feeling his body trembling slightly. I should really do this more, I didn't realize I was so inflexible, although I think I'm doing pretty good, he thought to himself, before blinking and looking over to Eiko, who reached even less than he had, and was struggling so much that she was gnashing her teeth with every attempt to push further back. Izuku was so surprised by the sight that he almost slipped with his form, before just stopping anyway, taking a deep breath. Do you want to move on to something else? Eiko stopped for a moment, before looking over and nodding. Then, she dropped it so suddenly she almost slammed her face into the mat and held her hands out to stop herself. To Izuku, at least, it was clear that she didn't do stretches like that too often, so he was a little confused about why she seemed so down on herself. Here, let's just do some light exercise to warm up instead, he offered, before leaning down to give her his hand. After a moment, she took it and he helped her up. Yeah, that sounds good, thanks. She let go of his hand, although she did so reluctantly. No problem, he replied, smiling sweetly, making her blush slightly. So, a minute later, they were sitting together, doing light bicep reps. Well, light was being said relatively, considering they were both super-built superheroes in training and were making light work of the heaviest bells. Eiko, can I ask you something? Eiko, who was a little lost in thought, seemed to jump slightly and blush from being addressed. Oh yeah, what's up? Are you a fan of Crimson Riot? She paused for a moment longer, then slowly nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. Why, yeah, I'm a really big fan of his. You don't think that's weird, do you? No, actually, that's amazing, he said excitedly, his face slightly beaming. I thought about it earlier, and I watched some older clips of his, and I could totally see how much you like him. Eiko let out a small, embarrassed giggle and looked away a little. Yeah? He nodded. I think he's a great role model, and he emulates a lot of qualities that heroes should, and a few that I can see that you like as well. I think he's pretty cool, and that you have pretty good taste in heroes. Like you, Eiko thought suddenly, before blushing and shaking the thought out of her head quickly. Really? Of course. Besides, I'm not one to judge anyone's tastes, he assured, before chuckling again. Plus it makes sense, given how much you're into being chivalrous and stuff. Eiko turned away a little further, and Izuku couldn't help but wonder if he had said something wrong. And you can ask me anything if you want. While she thought about it, before turning back to him. Who do you look up to? Naturally, his first response would have been All Might, but before he could get it out, he suddenly thought of Katsumi and Ochako as well. Yeah, All Might was awesome, and Izuku thrived to be a hero who also saved people with a smile just like him. But at the same time, Katsumi was the most hardworking and confident person he knew, who he'd trained and lived with for ages, and Ochako was saintly kind, and even when she talked about her supposedly self-serving goal, she only thought about helping people and making them smile. He smiled and sighed fondly. Now, he could see Eiko in that list of people. She was enthusiastic, strong, and valued being honorable and kind above all. Well, I think you're worth looking up to, Eiko. Eiko's eyes went wide and her face became as red as her hair was. Then, she slowly put her dumbbell to the side and looked up at him, looking overjoyed, but her lips were also a little tight as if she were upset about something. Do you really think so? She's so cute, he thought to himself, although he struggled not to say it out loud. Probably later, but it wouldn't be quite appropriate now. Yeah. He placed his dumbbell to the side as well. You're really nice, enthusiastic, cool, you have a good heart, and… Hey, I think we're all warmed up now, ha ha ha, Eiko suddenly interrupted, standing up straight. Hey, these benches here are free, let's do it, she suggested excitedly and almost desperately. Izuku recoiled for a moment, before standing up as well. Sure, I'll take care of these dumbbells really quick first, then, if you want to go first, I'll spot you. He offered while picking up Eiko's dumbbell as well as his own. Yeah, that sounds good, thanks, bro, she said, giving him a thumbs up as he smiled and walked away. She sat down on the bench and immediately had a miniature breakdown in her mind. Bro? I called him bro? How the hell is he supposed to pick up the signs if I do crap like that? She fretted, turning her limbs hard and clenching down on her legs hard as she cringed. Alright, are you ready? Izuku asked once he came back, before suddenly stopping. Eiko, are you feeling okay? Do you want to take a break, or we can just leave? He offered, getting onto one knee to see her face clearly. Eiko blinked once. She was snapped out of her thoughts, before looking slightly upward at him. He was so close that she felt like she could just jerk forward and her lips would meet his, and she blushed even harder and suddenly jerked backward while stammering. I'm fine, I swear. Izuku, meanwhile, seemed totally oblivious to what he had done, and just stood up straighter and sighed with relief. Oh, thank goodness, well, we can start whenever you're ready, he said, smiling kindly. In response, Eiko just felt like she would have another heart attack and clenched her teeth as her entire body became rock hard. Fuck, he's too cute, and Izuku yelped in fear, getting onto the bench with her, which only made her recoil again as she blushed harder. Eiko, are you in pain? He fretted louder, and meanwhile, Eiko just heard her breath and heartbeat in her ears, along with the perfect sound of his sweet, worried voice. She never thought that cute and manly could mix, but here he was, the perfect gentleman. Eiko never had any experience with men before. Sure, she had lots of guys as friends growing up, and her dad, and so on and so forth, but this was her first time with a guy who, as far as she knew, still didn't even see her as a girl. She had worn this gear as opposed to her typical stuff because she figured it would be easy to get him to look at her romantically, plus doing stretches because guys were supposed to find it sexy, but all he did was respect her, completely and totally. Slowly, and completely red-faced, she shook her head. No, but I think we should go, and without a hint of reluctance, he took her hand, and they were outside on the bench within a minute. She swore she could have blinked and missed the entire trip from there to out here. Are you feeling a little better? He asked after she had finished drinking from the water bottle he got for her on the way out, and she nodded quickly. She was still slightly red in the face, and her heart was still hammering against her chest. Better. Thank you, Izuku. He blushed slightly as well, then nodded back. It's no problem, really. You wanted out, so I just helped you out. He sat back against the bench, and after a moment, he felt her poke his arm with the water bottle. Oh, thanks. He took a quick drink, then capped it. So I didn't do anything wrong back there, did I? She looked at him, then smirked slightly as she sighed. Of course no, Izuku, you didn't do anything wrong. It was all me back there. Izuku tilted his head curiously. Really? Did something happen? Eiko turned away shyly, then just shook her head. No, it's just my problem, I'm sorry, I think I'll just go, she said, before getting halfway through standing up, but he had her hand again. Not forcefully or demanding she stayed, but gently and as if he wanted her to take him with her. Eiko, I haven't known you for that long, that's for sure, but I care enough about you to say that I don't want you to be facing your problems alone. If you'd let me, I'd love to help you, no matter what it is. He smiled again, and Eiko paused for a few moments. Then, she took his hand in both of hers, then sat back down next to him. Izuku, the truth is she was blushing harder again, and couldn't help but look away, before Izuku cupped his other hand in hers as well, and she looked back at him, and he was still just smiling sweetly. Oh, Jay, just please don't make fun of me, okay? Izuku shook his head immediately. It's okay, Eiko. Whatever you say, I won't judge you. Eiko stared at him for a moment, before sighing fondly again. Izuku, you're really cool, I guess that's why I can't talk to you, as a girl. Izuku seemed to take a few moments to digest it, before suddenly and dumbfoundedly tilting his head to the side again. I don't get it. Eiko sputtered for a moment, almost wanting to laugh herself at the sudden, silly reaction. I mean, most guys just see me as another dude, but I wanted you to look at me as a why, you know. A really pretty, hard-working, kind, sweet, and cute girl with a tomboy flair? Eiko choked on air, her eyes going wide and her face just as red as Izuku's was, who also held his lips tight and trembled slightly. He was clearly terribly embarrassed to say something so bold, but he also had the air of I said what I said, what about it? Pretty? Cute? Girl? She squeaked back, and he just rapidly nodded before finally inhaling. Why, yeah, it's kinda what I meant to say, when I apologized for touching you without permission. But the thing is, I do see you as a girl. I like you how you are, and you don't have to try to make me think that you're an adorable girl, because you just are already. By now, Eiko felt her heart going faster and faster, and her chest heaved slightly as she breathed. Izuku, do you like me? Not as a friend, but like me? She finally blurted out, and clenched his hands hard without realizing it. Izuku could only smile, holding her hands back with enough force that she wasn't crushing him. I do, Eiko. I like you. And I'd like to be together as we graduate from UA. He raised their hands and brought each other closer. As long as you'd have me, that is. Eiko's lips twitched upward into a wide, sharp, and overjoyed smile. I want to be with you, Izuku. Izuku and Eiko smiled so brightly that the passerby thought that a person with a sun-based quirk was sitting on the bench there. After a few moments, Izuku pulled away and stood up, then reached down to offer his hand again. Come on, let's get stronger together. Eiko laughed, then took his hand as she got up. Yeah, we are, let's do this. Sorry. She said bashfully, realizing she was yelling in his face before Izuku shook his head and smiled. It's fine, I'd prefer if you didn't hold back anyway, he laughed, making her smile a little wider, although a little reluctantly. But that was okay, he knew she was comfortable being herself when they met earlier, but began putting up a few fronts and acts to get him to like her, but once they spent a little longer together, she'd drop them all again, and he could have the real Eiko again. The real you is the one worth having, Eiko. I wouldn't have you any other way. Eiko was flushed for a few moments, before giggling and patting his back happily. That's such a manly thing to say, Izuku, you're awesome, you're going to be a super manly boyfriend. Izuku grinned widely, but his eyes flashed with realization. Well, I could be, but there's something I need to tell you first. Eiko blinked, then tilted her head a little, but still smiled softly. It's okay, I'll make you the same promise you made me that no matter what you say, I won't judge you for it, she said jovially, clearly very pleased to be able to tell him that. Izuku's expression became suddenly serious. I have 2 girlfriends already, Kaken and Ochako. He paused for a moment as Eiko's eyes became wide at the information. But she wasn't terribly aghast, nor did she look exactly happy about the news. So, he continued. And yes, they know about it, because I promised that no matter what, I would always make them the happiest girls in the world, and I would never leave them hanging, nor would I ever make them cry. If I ever break that promise, I've long since written my will for the moment I commit harakiri. And Eiko suddenly gasped, but he continued. I refuse to lead you, or them on, so if you don't approve, I completely understand, but I'll make you the promise I made them, where I vow to always make you happy, to always make you feel safe and feel better, and if I fail for even a moment, I'll be more than willing to. Before he could offer to kill himself again, Eiko pressed a finger to his lips, looking up at him with the same seriousness as he did. They both know? He nodded silently, keeping her gaze. And if I accept, I could join your little heir family? He nodded again, his eyes gleaming with joy at the notion. And you'd treat me right, and treat them right too? He nodded twice at lightning speed. Like a perfect, manly man gentleman? He nodded again. She stared at him for a few moments longer, both of them keeping their seriousness and intensity before she blushed a little and asked him, and you'd take me on dates, too? Proper ones, like to go out to eat, or go to the movies? He smiled fondly and nodded again as she slowly moved her finger down. The best dates ever, as good as you all deserve. After a moment, she hit him with the biggest, brightest smile she could give, hitting him like a flashbang and burning into his retinas, but like a true man, he just took it and smiled back. Haha, I'll hold you to that, Izuku. So, due to how things panned out, would you two accept Eiko as my girlfriend as well? It was the most difficult thing Izuku ever had to say, to stand before his girlfriends, Katsumi and Ochako, and ask them if they would accept Eiko, a stranger to them, into their relationship. Immediately after Izuku and Eiko left the gym, Izuku called up Katsumi and Ochako to have a serious talk about their relationship tomorrow before school. That in of itself was no hassle, but now that they were here, alone together on Yue's roof, Izuku found himself just as nervous as he was during the entrance exam. Scratch that, actually, because this was way more nerve-wracking. By his side, Eiko was just as nervous as he was and held her hands behind her back, sweat running down her brow while Izuku explained the situation, then dropped the big question. Ochako had her hands cupped in front of her mouth and her head lowered slightly, covering her expression, but Katsumi was more than upfront about how she was feeling. Are you insane? She shouted. Izuku didn't defend himself, he knew she had a point. Are you seriously insane, DKU? I can't believe it, Ochako said behind her hands in a shuddering voice, making Katsumi stop and turn toward her, her anger suddenly dropping and turning to worry. Deku. Our round-faced Katsumi said, stepping closer to her, before being suddenly taken aback by her expression, pure, crying, elated joy. Even though you've fallen in love with her, you're not breaking up with us. Are you insane too? Izuku began to protest, taking a step closer as Katsumi rounded back to him. Yes, it's true that I've fallen in love with Eiko too. His face got red from the proclamation, and so did Eiko's, who fidgeted slightly on the spot. But it's not that I've fallen out of love with either of you, nor do I love you any less, he insisted, placing a hand over his chest as he grew with a familiar kind of intensity. It's more like I've grown more love, just for her, just like I do for you too. Oh, it's that easy, huh? Like finding more oil deposits, instead of dividing what you've already got. Katsumi accused, stomping forward and jabbing his chest hard like a needle, but careful not to linger there and get lost in the feeling again. Guess so? Izuku said, flustered and rubbing over the struck spot on his chest, before shaking his head clear. But really, a metaphor like that doesn't do it justice. Eiko looked up and tilted her head over, slightly taken aback by his suddenly super intense expression. He looked even more serious than he did when he was talking about being a hero. I don't think there's much I can say, but besides that, it's more important than ever for me to use my actions rather than my words, so I'll only say that my promise to you still stands. I'll be a great boyfriend, and I'll never leave any of you hanging or wanting until the day I die. Ochako let out a small, delighted squeak from the heartfelt promise. Katsumi fidgeted, struggling between pure rage and relative calmness, before settling on crossing her arms and huffing poutingly. Finally, the stiff air between them was broken as Eiko sniffled, and rubbed her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. That's so manly, she sobbed, wiping her eyes one last time before suddenly slinging her arm around his shoulders and pulling him in. You're awesome, Izuku. Oh, Katsumi said, her eyelids twitching. She's one of those tomboy types, huh? Ochako tilted her head slightly at her. I mean, I've always thought of you as the same kind, Katsumi. And a bit of delinquent, too, now that I think about it. Suddenly, she rounded on Ochako and stepped forward, snapping Eiko out of her antics for a moment. And what are you, huh? Just a soft, girly girl derriere archetype, she accused. Why yeah. And what if I am? Ochako huffed, crossing her arms. Besides, you said you liked my softness. Eiko tilted her head slightly. What? She asked, just as Ochako and Katsumi clamped up and blushed profusely, seeming to have gone frozen stiff. Oh, near the end of chapter 2, Izuku provided, all three of us kissed, so. Don't just give away information like that, damn it, Katsumi roared at him, making him recoil and profusely apologize as Eiko seized up too, then suddenly began to back up as her face had become just as red as her hair. Wait, so you guys have already smooched, and stuff? Izuku was gut-checked by the amount of adorable force radiating from her, and therefore unable to answer straight away. That's such an adorable way to say it, he gasped out, forcing air back into his lungs. But yes, we have kissed, if that's what you mean. Eiko became more flustered several-fold, looking almost blasphemed by the prospect. Aye, she stammered, before suddenly moving her hands erratically until they snapped into a defensive form in front of her. I have to protect my chastity. Chastity? Izuku squawked, now as flushed as Eiko was and trying to defend himself, saying that he had no such intentions, then apologizing for giving her any lewd impressions. Meanwhile, Katsumi and Ochako just absent-mindedly thought to themselves while blushing, damn, now I want to do it again. Finally, Eiko had calmed down again and was comfortable walking back up to his side. Alright, just in case any of you forgot from yesterday. This he began, gesturing in front of Eiko, who nervously waved. Is Eiko Kurashima? Then, he turned and made the same gesture towards Katsumi first, then Ochako. Eiko, this is Katsumi Bakugo, and Ochako Uraraka. It's nice to meet you guys. Eiko greeted with a small bow, which Ochako gave back, while Katsumi just grunted to acknowledge her. I'm sorry for that embarrassing display a moment ago, when I kinda pounced on Izuku, here. Ochako giggled and just waved a little dismissively. It's fine, I get how it is to try and restrain yourself around Deku. Izuku was quick to add to this. Besides, it's cute anyway, honestly, it's just part of Eiko's charm, too, he said excitedly, with a very similar expression to how he would ramble off random facts about heroes he liked, like how she fidgets with her hands when she feels nervous, or how she uses her quirk when she's straining with something, or when her heart's throbbing and she swoons. Eiko let out a small gasp before her brow furrowed with thought. Do I really do that? She wondered, trying to think back before suddenly realizing that he was correct. Wow. However, the love monster / hero wasn't anywhere near done. It's really cute, especially compared to her rowdy and tomboy demeanor, like how Kacchan leans off the sun and more into the deer when she's worn out. But it's also the smaller things that make Kacchan so charming, like what she does with her legs to express herself. She does? Ochako asked, tilting her head slightly. Yeah, like how she bounces on her heels a little when she's excited, or grinds her foot when she's scared or nervous, or taps when she's impatient, or. Katsumi instinctively looked down. Her legs were slightly pointed inward, and one of her feet was idly turning on her toes. What the? She asked herself as Izuku kept going on, then she blushed even harder than before. It kind of reminds me of that cute thing Ochako does when she's nervous when she swirls one of her bangs with her finger. But, of course, like with Eiko or Katsumi, that's only a trillionth of what makes her so endearing. All three girls felt themselves having an impending swoon-induced heart attack. They felt their hearts squeezing, faces burning and blushing, and their teeth clenching intensely. Plus, just as Izuku said, Eiko's quirk activated a little while she clenched her teeth. Just how much attention does he pay to me, they thought in unison. Finally, Izuku seemed to snap out of his passionate rambling and turned to them, then began to blush a little too. Oh, did I say something embarrassing? I'm sorry. Don't be, Ochako insisted, giggling as she suddenly came to his side, eagerly hugging and pressing against him. Katsumi got to his other side and took his hand, out of no particular need than to not be outdone by Ochako. Why, you're still a dummy for saying it all out loud like that, she pouted, although without a hint of genuine spite. Then, Eiko paused and watched the scene for a moment longer. Her hand moved out, but quickly retracted it, almost like a reflex. She looked down and bit her lip slightly. A week ago, it would have been hard to imagine she would actually have a boyfriend this soon into high school, or having a boyfriend at all. And since then, it only got weirder with the discovery that her boyfriend had 2 other girlfriends that he loved too. In the short time she knew him, Izuku had already cemented herself as the nicest, coolest guy she knew, and while it wasn't entirely his fault, looking at them being so happy and touchy, it was easy to suddenly feel the crushing weight of inadequacy. Wait, hold on a second, Izuku said, gently pulling away from Ochako and Katsumi to stand by Eiko. I don't think either of you answered, but would you accept Eiko as my newest girlfriend? They both stalled for a moment, but Ochako began smiling again, although much more tame and gentle. Well, if you really love her as you love us, keep your promise, and we can get along, I have no objections. Katsumi just sighed before huffing and crossing her arms in a very official manner. Don't think we're going to be best friends or anything like that, shitty hair. Izuku let out a small, relieved sigh, before making a look of slight exasperation. Kaken, Izuku said, putting his hands on his hips. Fine, I'll call you Red, or something. Katsumi huffed, rolling her eyes. Hey, isn't it about time we get to classes? Oh, yeah, thanks for the heads up, he said, checking his phone. We should go. He put it back, then held both hands out, only to stumble upon an issue he hadn't foreseen, for he had only 2 hands, and 3 girlfriends to walk with. Then, he dropped to his knees and slammed his fist into the ground hard enough to crack it while his face scrunched up into a look of terrible pain and conflict. Damn it, why couldn't I have been born with another arm? Or at least tendrils to wrap around her hands? Ochako, who regained her footing the soonest after the tremor-like impact, was suddenly struck by inspiration and walked over to Izuku. Hey Deku, I have an idea, stay down. Izuku sniffled, then stayed down and waited as Ochako walked behind him. Then, he felt her pressing against him, but she was weightless and he smiled brightly as her legs went around his waist. There, now they can hold your hands, while I hang out back here, she chirped happily, before rubbing her cheek against the back of his head, nuzzling it appreciatively. Ehehe. Izuku stood up while hunched over slightly, blushing furiously. Why yeah, great idea, Ochako, alright, off we go, he said, now holding his hands out toward Katsumi and Eiko. Katsumi's face was completely red and her cheeks were puffed out furiously, and after a moment he realized that she was glaring at Ochako, while Ochako was just smugly looking back at her. Finally, she snapped out and grabbed his hand while still glaring at Ochako. Eiko, however, was a lot slower. Izuku smiled gently, and she finally took his hand kind of. Her fingers held his, but it seemed as if she were halfway off letting go. Alright, let's go, she declared before they left and began to walk to their classroom. Of course, it didn't go unnoticed by Izuku, Katsumi, and Ochako that they were the ones carrying the conversation almost completely, while Eiko was still blushing and only really responded with yes and no's until they made it to Class 1A. Ochako released her quirk and was shocked to feel that Izuku didn't buckle or falter at all when her true weight dropped on him, then blushed as she thanked him and walked into the room as he held the door for all three of them, before finally walking in himself. Most of the day, however, went by with hardly any note. After Aizawa was done taking attendance and congratulating them, when really she just gave them many of the same warnings she did yesterday, they met their teacher Cementos, for modern literature, Midnight for modern hero arts history, Ectoplasm taught mathematics, and Present Mike taught English. When he left, the class would be left alone for a little, so Izuku cupped his chin and leaned back as he began to think. Eiko seemed really shy all morning. Of course, I can't blame her. Of course, being in a situation like this is odd. I should have done something, maybe if I just waited and let her get to know Kaken and Ochako better as classmates first. Damn. Then, he was suddenly struck with a very surprising thought that seemingly came out of the left field. Hey, how many of my classmates are my soulmates? Izuku's eyes went wide and he put all of his power into staring right down at the desk. The Buddha of Love only said that he would meet them all while attending UA, so there was an equal chance that they would be one of his schoolmates as it would be just someone he meets by chance anywhere else. Of course, he wasn't against the idea of meeting more soulmates, but rapidly meeting them would be less than ideal. Then, he shook his head and had to resist the urge to slap himself. Oh, what's it matter? I'll meet them when I meet them, and it's up to me to do my best. Besides, if I do too much buffering, I might not even realize someone I've been sharing a classroom with is my soulmate until it's too late. He sighed to himself, then propped his head up on his hand. Besides, I should be wondering how to help Eiko anyways right now. Problems for later can be dealt with later, I guess. Finally, Izuku was snapped out of his thoughts as a familiar, booming voice came from outside the door. I am. Then, the door slid open, and All Might in his Silver Age costume slid into the room, looking as confident and strong as ever. Coming through the door, like a hero. The class began to cheer for All Might and grow excited, and even Izuku got distracted from his line of thinking as All Might closed the classroom door, and took place behind the podium. Good morning, future heroes. While yesterday marked your true beginnings toward herodom, today, as your first hero class, marks the beginning of your official training. Introducing himself in a gallant manner. Today, I have something very special for you all. We're starting our first ever lesson with a practical assignment. Wow, really? It's not going to be like Miss Aizawa's, where we'll be expelled if we fail, right? Ochako piped up, and All Might just laughed and shook his head. Oh no. I suppose it will be a bit of an assessment, since it's your first day, and near the end of the year or even the semester, you can look back and see just how mighty you've become, he said, giving a showboaty thumbs up like a golf swing. Now then, without further ado, he pressed a button on the desk, and the wall suddenly cracked open in 20 different spots along the wall, then extended numbered briefcases from the wall. Here are your super amazing hero costumes, all based on the notes, requests, and equipment all of you submitted. Take your cases, get dressed, and meet me in training zone beta as soon as you can. I'll see you all out there, heroes in training. And laughed again as he waved, then sped out of the classroom as everyone clamored to get their briefcases and get to the changing rooms as soon as possible. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, but Izuku especially was hugging his briefcase close to his chest while smiling brightly. Once inside the locker room, Izuku put the case down on the closest bench and opened up, then his eyes and smile widened even further. Yes. Finally, roughly 20 minutes later, the class reassembled in the training zone designed to be a city right where All Might was waiting. Izuku ran up to Ochako, Katsumi, and Eiko, and his eyes widened again as he looked over them all, starting to blush and even form hearts in his eyes. You all look so cool," he gushed, making them all blush in turn. Ochako's was an adorable pink and black suit with bulky pink-heeled boots and a helmet which made her look like a futuristic astronaut warrior. According to Ochako, every specialized piece was designed specifically to help her with nausea. "Thanks, Deku, although I should have specified what I wanted it made of. It's kind of skin tight, you know?" A perfect, blissful combo of cuteness and sex appeal with lots of functionality, a perfectly Ochako-ish costume, he declared, watching as Ochako giggled and looked down embarrassed. Katsumi's was a black jumpsuit sans the shoulders, with an orange X over her chest like a bombardier jacket, which made it easy to imagine her pulling out massive shoulder-mounted cannons over her back, along with black combat boots, scary-looking knee pads, and massive grenade gauntlets, which Izuku remembered could build up and deliver massive explosions over time. "Don't start drooling, nerd. I don't care if you think I am cool or pretty or whatever. Such a badass costume that fits Kaken's personality like a glove. You're like an action movie star. I'd come to watch all your movies and buy all your merch." And Katsumi, despite saying she didn't care, turned away and huffed, biting her lips while trying to contain a massive smile. Finally, Eiko's like Katsumi's. Her lower half was in all black, except for a cool and rugged-looking red sash that almost resembled a skirt, a belt with a big red R, and a cropped black shirt that covered her modestly, but still showed off a rock-hard pair of abs. Also, most interestingly, her shoulder guards were red gears, and she had a wiry face guard with little fang-like points, and her hair had little points resembling horns. You look so cool and rugged, like a real warrior. You look even manlier than Crimson Riot, Eiko." He grabbed his chest over his heart as Eiko fidgeted and held her lips as she giggled with embarrassment. I could get rescued by you girls all day long. I'd spend every last yen I had just to buy every piece of merch I could. I'd even be a villain just to get the privilege of getting arrested by one of you." With her tsundere gauge full, Katsumi jabbed Izuku in the stomach, making him keel over for a moment. "Don't say such embarrassing shit, nerd." Then, she grabbed the green rabbit ear-like pieces on his head and tugged. "Hey, don't damage his little rabbit ears. They're adorable," Ochako protested, stepping forward before giggling. "Is that what you're going for, Deku? I love it." Izuku chuckled, now embarrassed himself too. Well, not really." His eyes darted towards All Might, then the girls, and All Might too at this point, realized why he had those ears, along with the mask designed like a wide grin. "He's such a fanboy," all four of them thought at once. However, All Might just made an embarrassed cough, although he found it endearing, while the girls all internally squealed at how cute they found it. "That's so like Deku." Izuku. Hey Izuku, what are those things on your collar?" Eiko pointed out, looking at his neck. On top of his green suit costume, he also wore a short cropped jacket and a new and tactical-looking version of his normal beige backpack. Also, there were 3 pins attached to his collar: a pin for the Hero 13, a grenade, and a red fist with a jagged and rock-like forearm. "Oh, those? They're my good luck charms." He pointed at them and smiled brightly, seemingly shining through his mask. "They help me think that you 3 are always with me, and they remind me of the most important reason why I need to work so hard for you gals." All 3 girls made a very similar gesture to Izuku's a minute ago, grabbing their hearts over their chests as an overwhelming sense of love washed over them. Eiko's skin also hardened slightly as she throbbed, and in unison, thought, "I love you, Deku." Izuku. "I got them commissioned to be extra strong and super dense, would be safe to be more exposed, not that I would let them get damaged anyway. While the normal ones I made are in here," he added proudly, pointing his thumb over his shoulder and towards his backpack. "Deku!" Ochako cried, suddenly lunging for him to hug him tightly, before Katsumi roared in frustration and hugged him too, all while insisting that she wasn't jealous or anything. "Shut up. Goddamn, young Midoriya," All Might thought to himself. "Not even a full day in, and he already has a dedicated fan club. He's my successor, alright." Finally, he cleared his throat loudly and began to speak to the class. Good to see everyone assembled here, especially now that you're all in your incredible costumes. He looked over to Izuku and company, relieved to see that the girls got off Izuku, now just at his sides. As I said before, we'll be performing a practical activity for today, in this building before you. We need 10 groups of 2 who will be randomly paired together, then randomly select 2 teams to face off, 1 hero team and 1 villain team per match. He took out a raffle box and reached in. For our first team, Team A, we have Kirishima and Midoriya. Eiko gave a short jolt of surprise, then turned to Izuku, who was smiling even wider. Nice, let's do our best, Eiko. Ochako pouted, but Katsumi looked absolutely blasphemed. Hey, I want to restart, this is rigged. Besides, why can't we pick our own teams anyway? Well, it only makes sense, doesn't it? A tall girl wearing what seemed to be a hybrid of knight's armor and cyclist gear spoke up, with her face concealed by a helmet. More often than not, heroes don't get to plan ahead for the crimes they stop, so they typically pair with others who happen to be nearby. Haha, well done, Miss Ida. That's exactly right, All Might praised, it's true. Unless you're constantly being followed around by a partner of sorts, you'll be going at it alone more often than not, and will have to make do with whoever you're with. Katsumi huffed in frustration and pouted, but stood down. Whatever. Finally, All Might continued to pull names, until he reached Team E and announced Team E, Uraraka, and Bakugo. The 2 turned and looked at each other testily, and Izuku felt himself tensing up a little as they did. They had been working hard to get along, and Izuku was doing his best to help it along, but there was still a chance. Finally, Katsumi just crossed her arms and looked forward again. You'd better not slow me down, round face. Ochako crossed her arms too, looking oddly competitive in a way that made Izuku want to go into a Gapmo-induced swoon off his feet. As long as you don't go and blow everyone and everything up before we can hope to win. Izuku felt his chest welling up with affection. We went from a super sweet Ochako to a tangy one that's so cute, he thought, hiding his overly gleeful expression under his mask, but it did nothing to mask how much he was glowing from beneath it. And it's even cuter with her hero costume, they're all so adorable, I'm so lucky. Finally, when the last team, Team J, was announced, All Might finally began to explain the exercise. As I said, today's exercise is going to be in this building here. We'll have 2 randomly selected teams being pitted against each other, one the heroes, and the other the villains. The villains will go inside 5 minutes ahead of the heroes and will be given a dummy weapon to guard, and they can spend that time however they please devising a strategy, hiding the weapon on any floor they would please, barricading their position, whatever they can devise of in those 5 minutes, and will have to guard it for 30 minutes. A few of them nodded in understanding, and All Might gave a moment for the information to set in. The villains, of course, win by guarding it for the entire time, while the heroes will have to touch it just once, or both teams could win by securing the enemy in tape. Then, the knight-like girl raised her arm again and waited until All Might called on her. But sir, wouldn't these conditions heavily be to the villain's advantage? He laughed in response. Well spotted, yes, it would be. You see, statistically speaking, the fights against the worst villains will be taking place indoors, as they're the ones smart enough to realize that committing such crimes in public would make it all the easier for heroes to spot and stomp them out. Therefore, the heroes in this exercise will practice fighting against the odds, while the villains will be able to see into the minds of real villains in a similar situation. The class perked up in realization, fully realizing the wisdom in the exercise. I see, thank you, Sir Ida replied, before cupping her chin under the helmet. Getting into the mind of a villain, it would be a valuable learning experience. All Might nodded. Indeed, understanding your enemy and their line of thinking is always valuable, and in some cases will be the deciding factor in victory or defeat. You'll find that most of our lessons will be practical as well. As valuable as a curriculum is, all pros will tell you that experience will always be the best teacher, he announced with another laugh, before stalling as he had an idle, almost bitter thought, and by God do I hate doing paperwork and grading, it's a win-win. So without any further ado, time for another raffle, All Might announced, taking out another set of boxes, one labeled Heroes, and the other, Villains. Before All Might put his hands in and dug around, Izuku excitedly turned around to Katsumi, Eiko, and Ochako. Let's all do our best, right? Ochako giggled and stuck her fist out. Yeah, let's do it. Katsumi smirked in a usual, confident manner and stuck her fist out too. Please, with me on your team, you don't even have to try. I'll kill them. Eiko joined in slowly. Alright let's get them, Izuku. Izuku was gushing excitedly at the display, then nodded as he brought his fist out too, then joined them all in a four-way fist bump. Yeah, good luck, everyone. Our first match will be Team A versus Team E, All Might announced while the four had their backs turned. They were all rigid and stayed stuck. They slowly looked up, at their partners, then toward each other. Well, this'll be interesting. All Might thought to himself, looking over those four before he began to move on, matching up more and more students until all 10 teams had a match up. Alright, everyone but Teams A and E will follow me to the observing area. Team E, take these comm pieces and tape, then head into the building. Remember, you have just 5 minutes to do whatever you can before I send the heroes in, and good luck. And there they both took one, looked back toward Eiko and Izuku, then turned away again. Team A, they both stepped forward and took them, before carefully placing and securing them in their ears. Try your best and good luck with that. All settled, everyone else, follow me to the viewing area. All Might began to walk off with the herded class, but he half looked back to Izuku and gave him a thumbs up. Izuku stiffened a little, but quickly returned it. Finally, Izuku turned back to Eiko and offered his hand. Come on, let's wait by the building and talk strategy. She faltered for a moment but ended up taking it as she blushed. Yeah, sounds good, she said as they walked around the building, stopping near a door into the building's side, and standing against a railing. Do you have a plan, Izuku? He had to think about it for a moment, then shrugged. I have a few ideas. For one, I think Kaken is going to come for me, so we should make a strategy around that. That caught Eiko off guard a little, then she just tilted her head a little. What makes you say that? Well, Kaken's end goal is to be the #1 hero, and mine is to be a hero like All Might, so she kinda sees me as her competition in hero work. I think it'll be her way of telling me that even though she loves me, she's going to win. Eiko nodded in understanding and just stood there for a moment, before breaking the silence with a small giggle. She's pretty cool, isn't she? She asked, to Izuku's immediate, excited agreement. MHM. But how about you? HM? What do you mean? He asked. Do you see Bakugo as competition? Or at the very least, would you be okay with just rolling over and letting her win? Izuku paused. If it would make Katsumi happy, of course, he would just do anything she asked, but if anything, not seeing her as competition would probably be the most offensive thing he could do. However, at the same time, it was hard for him to think of Katsumi as someone he was going against. It was embarrassing, but he just couldn't make a solid thought. I don't know. Eiko nodded again, then leaned back against the railing. Want to know what I think? Of course. I think Bakugo wants you to be her rival, too. That made Izuku perk up curiously. Really? What makes you say that? Well, she's a really competitive and fierce person, and she loves you a whole lot. If you got stronger and kept pitting yourself against her, it shows her firsthand how much you're growing, and showing herself how good she's getting too. Kinda like two gym buddies spurring each other on, but not wanting to get left behind. Eiko explained, before turning forward and shrugging. At least that's how I see it, but I don't know her as well as you do, so maybe this is just nonsense, ha ha ha. No, that was perfect. Izuku said, making Eiko blush as she continued to look forward. Then, Izuku put his hand on her head, and began to slowly and affectionately pet it while she tensed up. Thank you, Eiko. I've been with Kaken for a long time, and I try really hard, but I have a lot to learn, don't I? Eiko stammered, her face completely red while he continued to pet her until Izuku noticed how embarrassed it made her, and he completely pulled away. Oh, well sorry, I have no idea what compelled me to just do that out of nowhere, Izuku stammered. Finally, he just turned and coughed into his fist awkwardly. It's no problem, really, she said, almost like a squeak. Anyway, we should probably talk strategy again, right? Izuku, eager and thankful to change the subject, just nodded. Why yeah, I actually have another idea, look at the windows. Eiko looked up and covered her eyes from above to block out the sun, but she couldn't see anything in particular. Okay. What am I looking at? Do you see how near the top, the windows get spaced out further, likely meaning the rooms are bigger, with taller ceilings? Ochako could use her quirk to make the weapon weightless and float it up, so if it's against a tall ceiling, we wouldn't be able to reach it easily. Eiko's eyes widened a little, and she quickly nodded. Oh, I see, with that in mind, we know where to be looking, so we don't have to waste as much time sweeping every hall, she giggled and leaned over, affectionately jabbing his shoulder. Good thinking, Izuku, you're really smart. Thank you, Eiko. Despite her one-track mind, Kaken is super smart anyway. If I'm right about Kaken coming for me, then I'm afraid I'll be leaving the more important part to you, getting the weapon, and by extension, dealing with Ochako too. At least until I deal with Kaken. Eiko just gave him a thumbs up and smiled. I've got you covered, I can use my quirk and punch into the wall so I can scale it if she does float it to the ceiling. But then, I'll have to find a way around her too. Ochako looked up as the nuclear bomb prop drifted to the ceiling like a blimp. She was worried about the weight, but it was hollow and made of cardboard, so it wasn't as big of an issue as she thought it would be. From what you said about the entrance exam, Katsumi piped up behind her, couldn't Deku just jump up there? She nodded, but smiled and held one finger up. Yep, but there's one problem with that, he couldn't without breaking his legs, and he already promised not to do it again. He wouldn't just point blank break a promise like that. Katsumi crossed her arms and nodded. Right. Ochako looked around the room. There were plenty of materials to barricade with, like barrels and panels of wood, but putting up a barricade would just give away their position more. From outside the room, they would have to come in to check and then look directly up, and unless they thought of that, it would have been impossible to find. Since Katsumi seemed on edge, counting down the seconds, Ochako just sighed and stretched. Hey, Katsumi? HM? What do you think of Eiko Kurashima? Katsumi paused for a moment and thought. She's pissing me off. Ochako's eyes widened a little. That was pretty harsh. She had agreed to this in the first place, and let her into their little family, so she wondered if she just lied in front of Izuku. Really? She seems pretty nice to me. You know, I think that's part of her problem, yeah. She grunted, which made Ochako shift uncomfortably on the spot. Whatever. The match is about to begin, she said, cracking her knuckles as she walked towards the entrance. Hey, where are you going? Ochako demanded with a huff. In case you forgot, we win by protecting the weapon. I'm going to go looking for them. We can win by beating them, too, she said, before stopping and rolling her shoulders, then cracking her neck to each side. Then, she looked back at Ochako. Besides, I need to have a talk. Finally, the match had begun, so Izuku and Eiko swept into the building and darted straight towards the staircase. I think the larger rooms are on the 7th floor and up, then we should start sweeping the rooms. Eiko nodded and followed behind him quickly. If Katsumi were to show up, Izuku would take her attention, and Eiko would continue to look for the weapon and Ochako, who would likely be left guarded. Finally, they reached the 7th floor, where the doors to the side were much wider, and the ceilings looked higher. Izuku looked back and nodded, Eiko nodded back, and they began to slowly creep around. Izuku looked around the corners to check, before signaling for Eiko to follow him as they swept and scanned the halls. At least until Katsumi found them first. She roared as she jumped around the corner and swung her arm wide. Eiko crossed her arms over her face and activated her quirk, but just a split second before Katsumi landed her hit, Izuku leaped and tackled Eiko, holding her around the middle and holding a hand over the back of her head, keeping her secure as they landed. Eiko blinked, completely stunned as he pushed himself up, looking down at her. Half of his mask was burned off, but his face was unscathed. Instead of panic, fear, or even excitement like Eiko felt, he just looked worried for her sake, looking her over with his hands still over her. With the lighting above him and how she was positioned under him, he looked like an angel or a dutiful, brave, chivalrous knight who saved her from danger, even when he was in more danger than she was. "Are you okay, Eiko?" She let out a slow, shaky, and hot breath, absolutely out of it even as she slowly nodded, and didn't recover fully until he got up and held her hand to help her back onto her feet. Katsumi held her hands to her side, popping small explosions in her open palms as Izuku fidgeted slightly. He was never on the receiving end of those explosions, but he had seen enough to know he didn't want to be. "Kaken." "Deku," she replied simply, walking closer. "Just give up, I know you wouldn't fight one of us, just make it easier for yourself." Izuku gulped and looked at Eiko for a moment, before turning back to her. "That couldn't be more true. I'd die an infinite amount of times over before the thought of laying a hand on you like that even goes through my mind, but Eiko helped me realize something. As long as you'll have me, I'll always be your boyfriend, and when we get our licenses, I'll be your partner as well." Katsumi was blushing now, realizing he finally outright agreed to create and join an agency with her. "But," Izuku continued, "but while we're still in training, you need a rival too. I'll practice and challenge you every single day, even hourly if you want. We can help each other grow, and be the best heroes we can possibly be." Katsumi just stood there, watching him carefully, before smirking as she walked forward. She didn't have her arms up, and her tension just seemed to evaporate. "You're serious about this?" He nodded quickly and held his hand out. "Of course. Would you accept me as your rival, on top of being your boyfriend?" Katsumi stopped a couple of paces before him and looked down at his hand for a few moments, before finally reaching and taking his hand, and they shook it while smiling at each other. "I do. Just don't feel bad if I end up wrecking you over and over again." Suddenly, they were both snapped out of it as Eiko sniffled, rubbing her eyes with her arm, then looked up teary-eyed. "I'm sorry, it's just you guys are so cool. That was the manliest thing ever, even manlier than Izuku was before," she explained before wailing and rubbing her eyes again. Izuku tried to go over to her, but found his hand completely trapped in Katsumi's grip. "I'm really happy you said that, Deku. Even if we are dating, I'd love for us to be rivals. But I didn't come down here for that." Katsumi swung her other arm outward, and Izuku blocked his face with the other one, but instead of hitting him, Katsumi swung him backward, and blasted the floor with a powerful swing. Eiko and Izuku cried out as they fell through, with Izuku lunging as far as he could to protect Eiko and Katsumi from the impact, but Katsumi blasted backward, throwing smoke in his face while also tackling Eiko. "Eiko Kaken," he shouted, just before hitting the ground on his side and scrambling to get up. Eiko and Katsumi were wrestling now, with their hands against each other's shoulders, and Eiko had turned on her quirk across her entire body. Just go, Izuku, I'll be fine," she promised, before screaming as Katsumi tripped her and swung her around to launch her across the corridor. Izuku's first instinct, of course, would be to stop it, but instead, he grits his teeth. I fine, I'll do it as fast as I can," he promised, before turning and blitzing up the stairs as fast as he could. Eiko had sprung from the floor and narrowly dodged Katsumi swinging in from above, causing a smokescreen with the debris from the ground and the explosion's smoke. "Come on, hairdo, show me how strong you are," she challenged, almost like a roar as she dashed from the smoke cloud. Eiko turned her quirk up more, then roared back as she ran up to her. Izuku kept grinding his teeth as he swept through the rooms, looking up toward the ceiling in them, but his mind was still gone. He felt guilty, but at the same time, he knew it would be over as soon as he snagged the weapon. I have to trust Eiko to trust in her strength, her durability, and her grit, and trust that Kacchan knows not to go too far. Finally, he skidded to a halt in one of the rooms with enough built-up speed to rattle the items around, before looking up. It was a massive bomb that looked like a nuke, and it was pressed against the top of the ceiling like a balloon. Finally, but if that's there, where is? He suddenly leaped sideways as Ochako came from behind with an open palm, trying to smack him and put him into zero gravity. "Whoa, nice reflexes, Deku," she congratulated cheerfully. "I thought I was being pretty sneaky." He smiled a little, then just shrugged. "Thank you. Although I guess it's hard to be sneaky in heels. But they're still really cool though." Ochako giggled, then began to show them off a little with a cutsy pose, then did the same with the other foot. "Thanks. I really like them too anyways. Would you mind losing, Deku?" Izuku had to bite his lip because his immediate thought was, of course, not anything you want, Ochako, I love you. "Well, normally I'd like to, but it's an exercise. I can't throw the match, even though I wouldn't mind. Sorry, Ochako," he explained, rubbing the back of his head. Ochako just shrugged. "Okay, I thought so. No harm in asking, though. Oh, what happened to your mask, Deku?" She suddenly began to fret, pointing at the side of his face where his mask was missing. "Kacchan ambushed Eiko and she blew off some of my mask," he explained with a shrug, before reaching back and pulling it down to uncover his face. "Thankfully, I moved the pins onto the other side of my collar in time so she wouldn't get ash on them or anything." Ochako blinked in confusion, then thought really hard about it. He was right, the pins were on the right earlier, but now they were on the left, the undamaged half of his face. Whoa, wait, how did you move them that fast?" "She ambushed you, so she was probably attacking the moment you saw her. How does that work?" Izuku smiled a little wider. "I didn't want anything to mark them, so I was really quick about it." Ochako blinked in confusion again and began to rub the side of her head. I don't really get it, but that's still really sweet of you," she said, before finally shaking her head clear and bringing her arms up in a grabby-looking way. "Alright, just let me touch you once, and it'll be over." Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly in concentration but paused. "Wait, what? I mean, she's obviously talking about her quirk, but..." She was downright panting in excitement, and her face was even a little red. On top of that, he swore her eyes had hearts in them, and her fingers kept flexing and moving excitedly at the aspect. "Oh, Ochako, by touching me, why you meant using your quirk on me, then taping me up, right?" Like a hungry predator, she stepped forward slowly and strikingly, her arms closing in. "That is what you meant, isn't it?" Then, Ochako pounced at him with her arms shot out, and Izuku yelped as he jumped to the side. "Ochako, please," he tried to reason, before limboing backward as Ochako lunged again towards his upper body, forcing him to awkwardly jump backward and land sliding on his back, managing to get to his feet just in time as she did it again. He scanned the room while he ran from Ochako. While the items scattered around would usually be helpful, he still had to fight off Ochako. Then, his eyes widened as he got an idea, then skidded to a halt before turning around. "Ochako, I really want to do the thing you asked for yesterday again." Then, Ochako went from a predator to a puppy as her face brightened with pure delight. "Okay," she chirped before spinning around so her back was facing him. Yesterday, Ochako asked Deku to try something with her that she saw on TV where the male lead hugged the female protagonist around the waist, then kissed her ear. When Izuku and Ochako tried it, he was embarrassed but stuck to it, while Ochako broke down into a fit of excited and almost crazed giggling while her knees buckled under her. So now, she completely abandoned her mission in order to try it again, and she waited, and waited for Izuku to hug her, but to no avail. Finally, she looked over her shoulder, and cried out in shock as Izuku disappeared. Then, she looked up and saw Izuku wall jumping, lunging between a wall and a pillar, finding whatever holding he could to heave himself up and jump again. She also noticed he left his backpack on the ground to leave himself unencumbered. "Are you playing Crash Bandicoot over there?" Ochako shouted at him, and he looked over his shoulder while clinging to a windowsill. "I am sorry, Ochako," he shouted back, before leaping again to the pillar, hugging it tight for dear life. "I'll do it when this is over, I promise." Ochako growled and activated her quirk on herself, then kicked off the ground to float towards him. "Get back here and kiss my ear now, Mr. A and lose," she demanded, kicking off a pillar to redirect herself towards him, but missed, and had to kick off another wall to dash at him again, until she was a mere few feet away. All of a sudden, Ochako's eyes shot open and she stalled in midair, before her cheeks puffed out and she shot her hands over her mouth. Oh no, she thought. When she blinked, the room looked darker, and her eyes were rolling back slightly. I hit my limit. She released, instantly feeling the weight of gravity rush back to her right as she began to fall back first toward the ground. Just as quickly, however, Izuku had lunged from the pillar toward Ochako and grabbed her, then spun right after catching her, curling his body before slamming into the ground, then slid across it for a few moments, ripping apart the back of his costume. Ochako panted heavily, letting her vision come back to her. She struggled to push herself up, and looked down at Izuku, who was still holding her as if they were falling. "Ochako, are you okay?" She paused for a moment before smiling. "I feel a little nauseous, but I'm okay." Just at that moment, several feet away, the weapon fell to the ground, breaking apart the legs. "But I'm only okay thanks to you." Ochako reached forward with her shaky hand and brushed aside some of his hair. "You're my hero, Deku. I love you." Izuku groaned as he pushed himself up onto his elbows. I love you too." Finally, Ochako pulled away from him, lightly clenching her stomach as she sat down. "Oh, please wait here for a second, Ochako," he said, before getting up to walk to his backpack, quickly bringing it to her, and taking a knee. She perked up curiously as he opened it, then retrieved a large container of red gummies, with a label saying Ochako. After a moment, she realized it was the same kind of gummies that Recovery Girl gave her during the entrance exam. Oh wow. Izuku smiled as he popped it open, pouring a couple into his hand before giving it to her. "I asked Recovery Girl for them, so I got one bottle just in case, and another specifically for you," he said, remembering how he had to be her janitor and assistant the night before to do so, but it was worth it. Ochako quickly ate the gummies, then looked up to Deku gratefully. "You're the best, Deku." He felt his heart begin beating in an abnormal manner, which in an odd way was normal, as that was how it reacted whenever the girls did something cute, which was always. Izuku put his hand on her head, then patted it gently. "Because you deserve the best." Izuku put the container back, zipped his backpack up, and hiked it back over his shoulders. "Do you want to sit out now?" Ochako just nodded. "Machem, Katsumi's going to be really mad at me, but I think you deserve to win, Deku." "If you can get past me," Katsumi roared, jetting into the room with explosions, then landing in front of the weapon protectively. Izuku took a slight step back while Katsumi growled and held her arms up, ready for a fight. While he agreed to be Katsumi's rival and fight her, it didn't mean he thought he could really win in a no-holds-barred fight, and Eiko wasn't anywhere to be seen, so he could only assume she was on a floor below, defeated. His only real hope would have been to use one for all, but there was a very long, very concerning list of reasons why he couldn't. But at the same time he didn't even have to fight. He just had to touch the weapon. He then tried thinking of a trick to pull on Katsumi, like the one he used on Ochako, but Katsumi was also a bit too one-tracked to fall for it in the middle of a fight. "You can still just give up," Katsumi said, detecting the conflict he was facing. "Even if we're going to fight, you can't beat me. The smartest move you can make is to give up." "Yeah," Izuku said with a small nod, but still put his fists up. "Probably." Katsumi smirked, before slamming her fist into her open palm. "Alright. But don't say I didn't warn ya, huh?" Katsumi looked up, and so did Izuku. The ceiling had a large crack in it, and then it expanded with a heavy, muffled tum. At that point, he could tell that it was denting downward, and after a moment, there was another great impact before the ceiling blew apart, raining debris, dust, and a flailing echo. "Echo?" Izuku shouted, suddenly panicking and rushing forward, dodging debris and holding his arms up, catching her in bridal style while she covered her face with her quirk activated. Besides the dust, there were clear marks from Ash and Katsumi's explosions. She uncovered her face in confusion, and upon realizing that Izuku was carrying her, began to blush furiously. Hey, Izuku." Izuku, also realizing what position he caught her in, began to blush as well. Hi, Eiko. Are you okay?" She nodded. "I am fine also. This eye is really nice, but could you please put me down now? We're still kinda doing this thing." "Oh right, sorry," he stammered, putting Eiko down onto her feet while she began to brush herself off. Izuku looked up at Katsumi, and she just had her hands on her hips while staring them down. "It's a 2-on-1, Kaken. It doesn't look good for you," Izuku said, while Katsumi just kept staring, before focusing on Eiko, then clearing her throat. Eiko looked back at her, then her eyes widened and she blushed even harder, then just shook her head. Look, I'll do it after." "Oh okay." What?" Izuku asked. Leaving the two of them alone, he would come to expect quite a few things. At worst, he would expect Katsumi to tell Eiko off for being a part of their relationship late, and at best, they would be friends, but he felt far too out of the loop here. Later. Katsumi grunted, before rolling her shoulders back. Now that he was paying more attention, Izuku noticed that Katsumi also had a few scrapes over her arms, and her mask was a little off-center. "So are we going to do this or not?" Izuku looked towards Eiko and nodded in a serious manner, before readjusting himself and fixing his fighting position. Eiko snapped from embarrassment to manly fighting mode, putting her hands up while grinning, and nodded back. Izuku rushed first, positioning himself low and charging straight for Katsumi, who just held her hand out and fired. Izuku sidestepped and hooked one arm around her waist, then picked her up as he charged like he was about to slam her into a wall or the ground, but held his other hand out to reach for the weapon. Realizing his intention, Katsumi aimed both hands backward and down diagonally, blasting herself and Izuku forward while also launching the weapon backward, sending it rolling across the ground. Eiko dodged to the side to avoid being hit by Katsumi and Izuku. "Eiko, the weapon," he shouted, before hitting the ground. "Right," she shouted back, before breaking into a sprint. Katsumi turned and tried to fire again, but Izuku grabbed her arm and spun her around, forcing her to face him. In frustration, she swung at Izuku with her fist. "Damn it, move." However, right as she swung, Izuku grabbed her arm almost like he was hugging it, and the sudden counter made Katsumi stall just a moment too long before she was suddenly spun around, and Izuku was behind her. He held her tight in a bear hug, keeping her arms to her side and stopping her from aiming her arms, before leaning back and taking her feet off the ground. "He's keeping his promise and fighting me, but he refuses to actually hurt me, either," Katsumi thought as she struggled, knowing that the simplest and straightforward counter would have been to throw her over his shoulder after grabbing her arm, but instead, he went for a hold. She spread her fingers out and was about to fire at the ground in order to propel herself and Izuku towards the weapon before a buzzer sounded, and all four of them heard all night in their ears, "And that's game, the hero team, Team A, wins." Katsumi looked up and saw Eiko hoisting the weapon over her head with one hand, then waved at her and Izuku with the other. "Well done, to the hero and villain teams now. Everyone come down to the viewing room for an evaluation, then we can begin the next team's match." Izuku gently set Katsumi down and she turned to face him. He was sympathetic but also had a clear underlining of pride and excitement. Her first impulse was to think, of course he's proud, he and Kirishima won. But the thought was shot out of her head the moment he put his hand on her shoulder and smiled. "You were awesome, Kaken. To be honest, it was a little scary to have to face you, but it's mostly because you're just so strong. Good job." Katsumi stiffened, and Izuku tilted his head slightly out of confusion and a slight amount of concern. Kaken? Are you okay?" She was completely frozen in place. Her face was burning and bright red, her eyes were wide and focused entirely on his face, and she was also shaking as if she were actually frozen. Katsumi's mouth gaped open as she tried to find something to say, only forcing out a few small, whimpering gasps, before backhanding him to the side and screaming as she ran to the door. "Don't you dare think I like getting praised or anything like that, dummy. I don't love it. I don't care. Shut up, I'm not like that. No. You're just trying to convince yourself," Ochako yelled after her, now that she fought off her nausea enough to stand and chase her partner out of the room. Suan. "Shut up," Katsumi screamed back, still running away, with her voice fading into the distance along with the heavy stomps of her boots. Izuku, who recovered from the hit, just stood up straight again and smiled softly in their direction, before turning to Eiko, who was carrying the weapon over her shoulder, before setting it upright on the ground again. She smiled, but rubbed her arm as she came closer. "So we won." Izuku smiled too, and nodded. "Yeah. You did great, Eiko. I'm sorry I left you alone with Kaken near the beginning." She just waved it off. "It's fine, I told you to anyway." "Hey, now that I think about it, is that why you rushed her first?" Izuku chuckled nervously, then just nodded. "I did, and I wanted to show I was at least serious about treating her as my rival too." After that, he couldn't help but blush a little and smiled. "But more than all of that, I just wanted to make sure you didn't get hurt." Eiko's blushed harder, almost looking like she wanted to chastise him, but was a little too happy to do so. Dummy. I'm more durable than you, she couldn't hurt me that bad anyways." She started laughing at her own comment but stopped completely as Izuku's hand gently held her shoulder. His expression was soft, loving, and gentle. Eiko felt as though she would swoon so hard she'd fall over if he weren't holding her. "I know. But even still, I'm your boyfriend, so I'm always going to protect you anyway." Eiko was still stunned and looked up at him with wide, starry eyes full of pure adoration. Izuku clapped his hand over his mouth and was forced to look away, since it felt like he was staring into the face of the sun. It was a glorious, mythical display of cuteness, and direct contact would scar his eyes forever. A moment later, however, he forced himself to look forward with a look of strained determination, telling himself no, what kind of boyfriend can't take the full brunt of his girlfriend's cuteness. Finally, Eiko giggled and hugged him around the middle. "That's pretty manly of you, Izuku." She shifted slowly so that her face was pressing directly against his chest, before looking up and pressing her chin against him. Izuku felt his entire body trembling and was left blushing even harder than before while stammering slightly, only being able to form a full sentence in his own head. Whoa, when did Eiko get so bold? This eye is so amazing, she's so cute." She smiled wide but still showed hints of bashfulness, showing off her sharp array of teeth while letting out a small giggle. "Thank you for being my boyfriend, Izuku." She's too damn cute. Izuku thought, feeling his entire body going rigid, almost like his heart throbbing was leading into a full-on heart attack. It's a higher honor for me. Honestly, I can only try my hardest to be a worthy boyfriend for you, Eiko. Izuku replied, but you're welcome. And hero team? All Might's voice rang in their ears, and both teens stiffened and went wide-eyed as they remembered something crucial their entire class was watching, including the teacher. I enjoy seeing that my lesson can help bring students together and form tighter bonds, but please, save the celebrations until later, he said, before cutting out, leaving Izuku and Eiko standing awkwardly in each other's embrace. Therefore, the couple took a step back, took each other's hand, and lowered their heads in pure embarrassment as they went down, refusing to speak or even look at anyone else until the matches were over, and All Might dismissed the class for the day, which was a few hours in total. Finally, All Might slowly and uncertainly walked up to Izuku and tapped his shoulder. HM? Young Midoriya, I am kind of concerned your costume is torn and you seem to have a few cuts. Please head to the nurse's office, he said, before turning towards Eiko. And you, young Kurashima, are free to join him or the rest of the class. He stopped talking as they got up, still blushing and still too embarrassed to look him in the eye, while the hero was left feeling like he'd done something shitty. But in his own defense, he couldn't help but feel like they would have begun making out if they were allowed to continue. He said to himself, now that his class was gone. Young Midoriya didn't strike me as someone who would have a way with the ladies, he contemplated, before shrugging dismissively. Well, he is my pupil, after all. Izuku groaned as he left Recovery Girl's office, looking over his own back. He had a few shallow, but long cuts along his back which needed some bandages, and his hero costume was too torn for use for a while, so now he would have to use the P-Dotty uniform, along with his accessories, until a replacement was finished. Hey, Izuku, Eiko called from the bench outside before hopping up. How are you? You didn't get too hurt, did you? He just shook his head and smiled softly. No, I'm fine, but I wish I could say the same for my hero costume, he said with a sigh, but thank you for asking. How about you? Kacchan can get a little carried away, especially in a competition or fight. Nah, although it did get pretty toasty. She joked, before her cheeks were suddenly flushing a little. Actually, we had a pretty good talk. A talk? Izuku asked, before his eyes suddenly widened as several pieces suddenly clicked. Oh, I think I get it. I thought you might. You see. Eiko's quirk, hardening, was kind of like flexing or holding a breath, but she liked describing it as flexing more often because that made it sound cooler. The harder she made her skin, the more it made her muscles ache and the shorter she could hold it for. And like holding a breath, it was much harder while being active. So of course, forcing herself to be as hard as possible while in a fight where she was being beaten by a living grenade launcher for a few minutes, she felt like she was being strained into the very last millimeter of her willpower. She ground her teeth and revved her fist back as Katsumi charged, but blasted at a meter away, so when Eiko swung, all she did was stumble into a smokescreen while Katsumi blasted the back of her head, before landing a few feet behind her. She's fast, she has a range advantage too. My only hope is pushing through the force of her explosions fast enough to get a good hit on her. Eiko thought, before punching her fists together to get herself pumped up, reapplying her quirk across her skin before snapping back around towards Katsumi. Stop holding back. Katsumi demanded stiffly, before slowly dropping her guard and standing up, looking more annoyed than anything. Eiko stopped for a moment, feeling her own guard dropping just slightly. What are you talking about? I'm fighting my butt off here. Yeah, I know that, but you're holding back. You're holding back on me, round face, and Deku. She said, her face scrunching slightly in annoyance. You're starting to piss me off. Eiko blinked in confusion. She couldn't help but feel like it was a trap, but couldn't see her making any moves. I don't get it. back on the roof and around us, you keep holding back around Deku. You're acting like some girl whose relationship is hidden from everyone else, as if Deku's cheating on us with you," she explained, growing angrier with each word, finally stomping forward. "You love him, don't you?" "Why, yes." Eiko stammered out, now blushing slightly as she stepped back. "And he loves you, doesn't he?" Eiko gulped, before nodding. "Yes, I really think Izuku loves me," she announced, before suddenly blushing much harder. "And do you think he loves you because you hold back all the damn time? By not being yourself, and not doing what you want? Do you expect us to get along with someone who can't even be honest about who she is?" Eiko, caught off guard by the most threatening but heartfelt pep talk of her life, could only step backward as she shook her head. "Exactly, now what the hell do you want?" She stopped and thought about it. She wanted, more than anything, to be with Izuku. She wanted to graduate with him and get along with Katsumi and Ochako, and to be a heroine just like she dreamed of. But at that thought, her eyes widened as she realized what she truly wanted. Eiko took a deep breath, then closed her eyes and began to shout, throwing her shame to the wind. I want to win, I want to beat you, and I want Izuku to congratulate me with a smooch." Katsumi stopped coming closer, then let out a sigh. "You know, you're not going to win. But he'll probably kiss you to make you feel better." And just as Eiko was about to retort, Katsumi held her hand up and fired at the ceiling above Eiko, dropping the ceiling on her before she could leap out of the way. Katsumi watched as the left bits of debris fell onto the pile above Eiko and the smoke cleared, before smirking and turning around to head upstairs. "I'll hold you to that hairdo." Eiko chuckled as she rubbed the back of her head. "I had to get the rubble off and run pretty hard after the sound of Bakugo's explosions, but I'm glad I made it in time." Izuku, however, could only bring himself to nod while his insides were bursting with joy. "I can't believe Kaken gave her a pep talk like that. She really is just a big softie, that's so cute." However, just as they were coming closer to the corridor with Class 1A, Eiko stopped walking, and Izuku paused to turn toward her. "Is something wrong, Eiko?" Eiko was looking down at her feet and slowly put her hands behind her back, before looking back up at him while blushing nervously. "And nothing really, it's just that well, there was something I was kinda hoping you were picking up on." Izuku paused for a moment before he began to blush as well. "Oh, all right. Well, I guess we both can use a little congratulations, huh?" he joked, before stepping closer to close the distance, making Eiko look up to meet his gaze. Her arms nervously came up again. Unlike earlier, she didn't have the adrenaline rush of a good fight and splendid victory to hinder her hesitation. However, Izuku put his arms around her first, hugging her just around the middle, which encouraged her to hug him back, placing her arms around his chest. "You did great out there, Eiko. I'm really proud of you. I meant to say it earlier, so I'm sorry. I love you." Eiko fidgeted a little, and couldn't help but to smile a little wider and blush brighter. "That was a perfectly manly confession, Izuku." She leaned closer and giggled. "I love that about you. But most of all, I love you." They both moved closer and closed their eyes in an excited but slow unison, almost like a dance, and they kissed blissfully. "Her lips are rough, but she's so soft and nervous," he thought after the initial shock induced by joy and love. "Eiko is so." Izuku opened his eye just slightly to admire her blushing, ecstasy-filled face as she continued to kiss him deeply with her eyes closed. He felt his chest bursting uncontrollably with joy as he finished his thought. "Lovely." As one would expect from a relationship like Izuku's, and his girlfriend's, peacekeeping and compromise were vital. Some compromises were more extensive, like a commitment to get along with everyone, and some were smaller, which could, unfortunately, lead to more significant, more catastrophic results if not resolved. As a defense against this theoretical doomsday, this meant that the day after Ochako got a piggyback ride from Deku down to class, he would have to give them all piggyback rides in turn. Eiko was next because Katsumi was too blinded by her Sun-Y delusions to admit she wanted one. This led to our current scene: Izuku walking down the halls of UA with a blushing Eiko riding on his back, her arms secured around him while she hid her face behind his head of massive bushy hair. Ochako was on his left and holding his hand, smiling contently while Katsumi held his right hand, looking to the ground furiously while blushing and twitching. Izuku, meanwhile, was just blissfully being led along while carrying Eiko as if she were weightless. Katsumi's eyes darted upward towards Eiko and remembered how happy Ochako looked too. Damn, Izuku hasn't held me yet. Round face got carried twice, and now hairdo? Damn it, I want it. Are you okay, Kachin? Katsumi looked at Deku's face, still emitting the blissful happiness he had a moment ago, but now clearly laced with worry. The kindness and blissfulness seeming to radiate from his expression instantly breached her defenses before she could even put up her mental thunderous shields and forced her to swoon on the spot. For a solid few moments, all she could do was stammer endlessly, before swiftly turning her head away dismissively as if she were upset, only to hide her blushing, smiling, lip-biting expression with hearts practically gleaming in her eyes. Shut up, stupid Deku. Ah, alright, he said chirpily while making a mental note to find an excuse to carry Katsumi later. Katsumi still looked away from him in embarrassment, but blinked and looked up when someone had caught her eye. She recognized her from class, the tall, fair-eyed girl with blue hair. The girl glared at them disapprovingly and crossed her arms at the display, and Katsumi just stuck her tongue out at the girl and turned away, leaving the four-eyed girl to stomp away of them, which made Katsumi smirk as she heard her walk along, clearly pissed but unable to bring herself to say anything. Yesterday, that same girl had told her and Ochako off when they got to class after the practical exercise for their behavior or whatever, but Katsumi told her to take her glasses case out of her ass and left with Ochako. Either way, seeing that she was getting annoyed while also leaving them alone made Katsumi satisfied, so she just left it at that and joined the conversation the rest of them were having. Finally, the lovers made it to room 1A, and Izuku got the door for them as they came in, seating themselves just moments before their homeroom teacher, Ms. Aizawa, or Eraserhead, walked in with her usual stoic and frightening disposition. Like always, she glared down at them as she reached the podium behind her bug-like yellow goggles. Today, however, everyone had learned better than to talk after she walked in, so she let out a small and almost pleased-sounding huff before getting right into business. About time anyways, the first order of business today, we have a vital matter to attend to, she said in her typical authoritative and disquieting tone which raised the hair on her class's necks. Today, you're going to be choosing a class president. The sudden relief the news gave made the class give a collective sigh of relief, and a few even laughed.